So Mercedes is going to be installing a purple martin pole at her house.
I am.
And the pressure's on for you to get birds now that I've mentioned it.
Yeah.
My most shameful secret while we're doing confessions. Did you know we were going to do confessions? I'll do the first confession. Is that I tried to get purple martins at my own house and I was unable to. But it was a long shot because we're surrounded by trees. But it led to a funny story in that I had decoys up there like you're supposed to, and I had the dawn song playing like you're supposed to attract martins. And, it was years that I was trying. So every summer the dawn song's blaring and we're in a subdivision. And like the last year before I took things down and donated the pole to somebody else, a neighbor was walking their dog and they stopped and they said, "We just love your martins. We always stop and love to look at them and listen to them." I didn't have the heart to tell them that it was plastic martins that haven't moved in 6 years and that it's a recording of the Purple Martin Dawn song that's playing. But yeah, they were very appreciative of even the fake martins. So, but that was when I took it down and donated it to somebody who might be better off to attract martins because we're really boxed in by trees. It was a long shot, but I figured I should try. Being the PMCA president, I probably should try to get martins. But in addition to the martin colonies we have here, I also manage one at a public site at a local firehouse. So I do have my own purple martin colony that I've kind of adopted there. So if you out there at home are not in a great place to get martins for whatever reason, see if you can set up a public colony and manage it. All right, that's it. Your confession can come later.
You have till the end of this to find out what your confession
to decide
is.
what to confess. All right, I will not be making Mercedes confess anything. Even though we have the interrogation lights on and everything.
We do, it's very bright.
All right, well, welcome to the live Q&A number 4. I hope everybody can hear us loud and clear. We got the little microphone things on. You're still upside down.
Yeah, but you can still hear, right?
I don't know. Maybe it's
the
different.
little flip thing went that way.
Oh, okay.
Can everybody hear me?
All right. Well, our topics were seasonal type stuff, like cleaning up your housing, where the martins are going, adding, removing housing. This is like the best time of year to add or make changes to your colony setup because, these guys show up first thing in the spring. Here they show up and our ground is still frozen, so it's not exactly a great time for digging a hole and putting in a new purple martin house. We should introduce ourselves. Hi, I'm Joe Segrist. I'm president of the Purple Martin Conservation Association, and with me is...
I'm Mercedes, and I'm the research manager at the PMCA.
All right, sorry. I always forget to do that, and usually somebody says, "Hey, who are you?" You need to... Lydia's the director behind the scenes here. You need to have cards, say who you are. But yeah, we've got some pre-submitted questions, and you guys are welcome to and encouraged to enter any questions you may have in chat, and we'll try and get to those after we do the pre-submitted ones. Maybe this will spark a question, or you'll just remember something you've been wondering, or we could expand on our conversation. So we'll go for, about an hour. We don't have as many questions on paper as we have for the last couple. So maybe we can get to even more of chat's questions then. So, all right. Our first question is from Michelle. She said, "A friend offered to give me pine needles to put in the rooms before they arrived, but I was afraid they wouldn't want to use the room. Maybe they think another bird did this." Just a side note, she cleaned out her housing and noticed there was very little nesting material in each cavity. Should she be concerned? Should she add nesting material before nest season? So she had some nests upon cleaning out that were pretty sparse, and she's wondering, is it okay to add nesting material? Would that scare off the martins? So yeah, it is something that we encourage, adding nesting material. You have to think that these birds, being colonial nesters, they don't want to be the first one anywhere. They want to be somewhere that other birds are going to show up. So if they look in, historically, if they looked in a brand new woodpecker hole or something, and it was super clean, then that would imply that martins didn't nest there last year. So the thought is we capitalize on that instinct of them to nest colonially by adding nesting material, and that has the added benefit of adding a little bit of insulation to the bottom there. Like I mentioned before, it's pretty cold still, at least at nights, no matter where you are in the martin's range when they're first arriving. So to get them up off the cold floor with some insulation material is always a good idea. Give them a little head start. Maybe they've got a little less energy that they have to spend collecting nesting material that they can then devote to their young, or making eggs, or just survival in general. I don't know, Mercedes, what do you think about adding nesting material to purple martin?
Yeah, I definitely agree, and we recommend using pine needles because it doesn't stay wet. And the martins do build their own nests, so they will typically build a nest on top of the pine needles. Michelle noted that there is very little nesting material in each cavity. A lot of times we'll see the younger birds, like the subadults, do that. They're not as experienced, and sometimes they might just throw a single leaf or a twig in there and then lay eggs. And I think the pine straw can help with that too, because it gives some material for those eggs to be on, and depending on the housing you have, if there's no nest built in there, the eggs can kind of roll around a little bit and not stay in a good cup for incubation. So adding that nesting material in there can help with that too.
Yeah, it can keep the eggs centralized, because when in our housing with the flat floor, when they're subadults, they have sometimes just the worst nests, and those eggs are rolling all over the place. So they're not getting incubated regularly. When we do nest checks, we try and move them back to the center, but sometimes it just, they're figuring things out. One other thing to mention is that we have some birds that we pre-nest with pine needles all of our compartments. Sometimes they decide they don't like it and they pull all that junk out of there.
Yeah, they push it out.
Yeah. So, but some will build happily right on top of it. So you may still end up with nests that don't have a lot in it after adding the pine needles, if it's one that just decided they didn't like that. So I don't know, it seems like a very individual thing on what they use for the nest and how big they build it and that sort of thing. From Talia in Connecticut. Talia, if you're here, are you the Talia that I talked to previously, several years ago? It's just such an unusual name that I think this might be the Talia that maybe is from Brazil. I can't remember. Anyway, she's struggled to attract martins due to house sparrows and European starlings, and they are thinking about moving their housing. So their question is it feasible to design a platform structure where the purple martin house could be put more into a pond and monitored there? They wonder if we've had any success or know of anyone putting purple martin houses over water. So they're thinking that, putting the housing at the edge of water or even over water might help to deter sparrows and starlings and maybe be more attractive to martins. So there are plenty of people that have purple martin housing along the edge of water or even on docks and piers, kind of bolted to the side of the wood. They have success in getting martins. I don't know if really they're going to have less pressure from sparrows or starlings. I suppose if you're talking, if your current location where you have the purple martin housing is close to a barn or other buildings or garbage cans or whatever that may kind of really have a lot of sparrow or starling activity, moving away in any direction from that is an improvement, right? So the challenge with Martin housing over water is twofold. The challenge of nest checks is increased greatly by that, especially on those people that have like their houses like on the edge of a pier. You know, it's easy, you can lower it down and check the nests that are facing the pier easily. The ones that are on the other side are a heck of a lot harder to check. You're hanging out over the side, or you've got a mirror, or you just don't check those at all because you can't. And I imagine there are similar challenges with kind of mounting it in the water itself, putting the pole and, you know, where it's submerged. The other challenge I can see is during fledging time. So, you know, the martins don't always get a lot of air under their wings when they fledge. You have some that end up on the ground or fluttering close to it, or maybe flutter down and touch the ground and then, you know, manage to get some air under themselves. If water is what's below them in that situation, then they're not going to be able to bounce off the ground or easily get lifted back off, and they're in a bad situation. And so that's another big challenge that you know, maybe the martin housing over water is not the best plan. But yeah, so, you know, things to reduce your sparrow and starling pressures besides, you know, moving the housing over water, which we kind of think may not be the best plan. What do you think, Mercedes?
I guess if you have starlings, you can remove them from the housing by using starling resistant entrances, and then they're not a problem in your martin housing anymore. If you have bird feeders on your property, those tend to attract the sparrows and the starlings, so either remove those altogether, or sometimes if you use, like, it's the black oil sunflower seeds, those aren't really that desirable to sparrows, and you might get less of them if you only use those seeds in your bird feeder. But I agree with everything you said about it being on water. It's just much riskier, and if you still have sparrows and starlings, you no longer can address that problem because it's unreachable if you have your housing on water. But certainly if you can move it away from those areas that Joe said might have more starlings and sparrows and put it alongside your pond, not exactly like in the water, but beside the pond, that giving yourself enough space to be able to check around your housing, then I would recommend that versus putting it in the water.
Yeah, well said. Okay, the next question is from Brenda in Iowa City, and this one is all yours.
Project Martin.
Yeah, she says, is there a set deadline for submitting your Martin Watch data forms? And then she also says, do you have any tutorials on how to submit reporting electronically on your website?
Okay, so I can talk about Project Martin Watch for a second. That's our project where you can submit your nest check data from colonies that you manage to us, and we input it to a yearly database that we categorize by like regions of the country, and we have an analysis in the winter issue of our Purple Martin Update magazine. So in order for your data to be a part of that analysis, we have a deadline so it can be printed in the magazine. So that deadline for your data for that season is September 30th. We are always accepting data outside of that. It's just if you want to be sure your data is included in the analysis in the magazine, please submit it by September 30th, which is coming up. So if you haven't sent in your data, send it now, because then we'll probably, there's a few days after that. We're still working on entering the data. So if you can get it into as soon as possible to make sure you're included in that analysis in the magazine. Yeah,
I'm going to jump in real quick before you hit the next one. So that's not the only analysis that goes on with that data. So, the analyses are constantly being done. We're constantly working with other collaborators to request the data set. So no matter when you submit your data, it is absolutely welcome and we want it. But yeah, so that specific analysis that ends up in the magazine that shows kind of how Martins did that year, that's really what the deadline is for. And some people work best with the deadline. I know I do. So consider that the deadline. But anytime, if you have data from past years, send it to us. Yeah, it doesn't matter how old the data is. If it's usable in our database, we absolutely want it, because the broader that data set is, the more accurate and the more science that can be done with it. Sorry to interrupt.
No,
Go ahead.
thank you. She also asked if we have any tutorials on how to submit the reporting electronically on our website. So in order to participate in Project Martin Watch, you can submit your data directly into the portal in our website. We also have an Excel file available, and then we have the paper nest check sheets that you can mail a copy or scan a copy and email it to us. Whatever form of submission is easiest for you works for us. We do not at this time have a tutorial on the website, reporting it that way. Maybe it's something we can make in the future. It is pretty simple. It's just easier if you keep up with it and you enter your nest checks, as you do them, or weekly, instead of waiting until the end of the season and then inputting your whole season of nest checks. That can be quite cumbersome if you do it that way.
That's pretty daunting when somebody sits down. They think, that doing it online is going to be faster. It's really the same amount of data that you're putting in, whether it's writing it on paper, typing it in a spreadsheet, or entering it on the website. And that's a source of frustration for some people, thinking, boy, this is a heck of a lot of work. Really, if the best way to do it to reduce that kind of burden, because sometimes it gets to the end of the season and people see that and then they don't submit their data because it's so much work to type that up then. And that's the last thing we want. So, just entering your data on a regular schedule as you're doing the nest checks, no matter what the medium is that you're using, is really the key to doing that. But yeah, so, admittedly, our online portal has some refinement that's necessary to it. We're currently working on kind of a new version of the website with upgrades behind the scenes. So hopefully that is improved in its usability in the future. But, the good old-fashioned pen and paper and our forms, that's kind of the way the majority of ours comes in.
Most people send their paper nest check sheets, whether in the mail or scanned and emailed to us.
Yeah. So, but then that requires a person on the other end, on our end, entering it. So, it from your point of view, Mercedes, is the spreadsheet, the Excel spreadsheet, is that less work on your end to utilize? Because you kind of have to assess their nest check frequency, no matter what the form, right?
Yeah, the Excel and the paper sheet's pretty much the same.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so that's Martin Watch. All right, next question from Muriel, the bird lady, in quotation. She says, purple martins visit every year but will not nest. The bluebirds do. A couple of comments here about her situation. She says she has aluminum martin housing in a good location away from trees, fences, near a pond, but has been trying for 5 years with no martins nesting. She has 2 bluebird boxes that are occupied every year. What can she do to get the martins to stay? Well, first off, it's fantastic that you've got martins sniffing around in the first place. The fact that they're interested enough to come look at it is a huge win on your part, and that just kind of shows that a lot of those factors are what they're looking for. I don't know, Mercedes, you want to take this one?
I was just thinking, she said she has an aluminum house. So some of the aluminum houses on the market have smaller cavity sizes that you can enlarge to make them more suitable for martins. So if you have visitors that are checking out your house but they're not staying to nest, that's kind of something that comes to mind for me, is maybe your cavity sizes are too small and they might not feel safe to nest there. I guess the other thing is you have bluebirds, as long as they're further enough away. I don't know if the bluebirds are, just from the context of it, it doesn't sound like the bluebirds are an issue. They're just nesting.
Yeah, it sounds like she's successfully getting them to nest in the bluebird box. But yeah, if you also have bluebirds in the martin housing, that's a recipe for never having martins settle in there to nest, because the bluebirds are a little more defensive about the whole area around their nest, so that includes the rest of the cavities in the house. So it doesn't quite specify that she does or does not have them in
But
there.
those boxes should be like 30 feet away.
Yeah, I think that's safe. So around each of our purple martin houses at our different colonies here, we have 2 bluebird houses, and the thought is that a tree swallow pair will nest in one and bluebird pair will nest in the other. Rarely have we had both at the same time, but we usually had one or the other, and that really takes care of a lot of the pressure from those native cavity nesters on the purple martins. If you do have purple martins that are trying to nest in your bluebird house or in your martin house, did I say that right? Bluebird's trying to nest in your martin house. Offer a bluebird house in the vicinity and close off all of the cavities in your martin house. Likewise with tree swallows. You really want to get them nesting elsewhere because their defensive radius is much higher than a purple martin. A couple of other things you might be able to do. I'm thinking, maybe offering some gourds in addition to the aluminum house. Some people have found that to work, although, that may just be, the martins were going to nest there that year anyway, so it's hard to pull out what's a coincidence and what's not from adding additional martin housing types. But it's pretty easy to just add a gourd or 2 hanging underneath an aluminum house. I don't know, other thoughts on it?
There could be a martin colony close by, and these have just been visitors. And when you have one nearby and there are a lot of martins there, that's just more of an attractive place for birds to nest at because they like that safety in numbers. So sometimes it can take several years to get them to nest to your colony, and you can be doing everything right, but you just have to be patient, and eventually you'll get that first pair, hopefully next year.
Yeah, again, like I said, I think the fact that they've had martins sniffing around and just not nesting there's a great sign. Also make sure you're doing the standard attraction things, right. Playing the dawn song, having some decoys up, pre-nesting material like we mentioned earlier in the Q&A. Just make sure you're doing those. But I'm assuming, it sounds like they have a little bit of a grasp for the whole martin thing. So I'm assuming they're probably doing that anyway. But you want to make sure you're never too good or too experienced to do the basics to attract martins to your location. All right, next question is from Adrian Rodriguez. He reports that his birds arrived earlier in 2004 than in 2003. So his questions are, and he has multiple, are martins returning back to the States earlier than usual? Could warming weather patterns overall prompt the birds to return earlier than normal to their man-made housing sites? Overall, there has not been a large shift in their arrival times. There's just kind of this inherent variation to it. Even though we sometimes have warmer springs than usual, at the same time, the next year we may have one that starts off warmer than usual, and then there's a huge cold snap that really is harmful to the birds who have arrived. So really, even though the overall average temperature may be increasing and those days of first green up in the spring might be advancing slightly, it's not that the entire time after that is safe for martins to arrive. So there may be a year where all those martins that came back early did fantastic and they all bred early and they took advantage of that. And then there may be a year that they absolutely get wiped out, like we had a few years ago in Texas and Louisiana. That was 2021 maybe.
21.
Much more notable and extreme when it happens down there. Up here farther north, where we kind of having late winter storms is not as uncommon. It's just kind of a standard occurrence here. Every year or two, we have some martins that come back early and get got by the cold weather. And a couple of other questions. Who can I partner with to capture and tag returning martin with geolocator band? They want to know if it's the same birds that return back to their colony year after year. So you're mixing the terminology a little bit, but really the answer is the same for both. So to band your birds just with leg bands, or to take part in a study where you're putting backpacks on the birds and tracking them, that requires a researcher to be doing an experiment that they're looking for someone in your area. A lot of times these research projects are, have regional and local factors that they're considering. So, maybe they're comparing how birds in Florida compare to birds in Pennsylvania, compared to birds in Canada, or birds in Texas to something else. Or there's multiple locations being studied to just kind of get an overall look at the purple martin species in general. But at the root of all those is a researcher, a university that has all the appropriate licenses, that is looking to, involve a new colony of purple martins into. And that doesn't happen very often. You're more likely to be able to find a bander to just band your birds, but to do the migration tracking is a whole nother level that is fairly unlikely to happen at the time that you want it to happen. That's not to say that there's never a research project that's like looking for a purple martin colony. In fact, just a couple of years ago, we expanded a large research project in Texas in concert with Texas A&M and University of Manitoba. But really your best bet, if you're looking to just band your birds, is to find a local bander and ask them if they're interested in banding purple martins. So where can you find a local bander that's licensed? You're going to want to contact your local Audubon or a similar birding group, or a local university that has an ornithology program. Beyond that, it's unlikely that you're going to find you're just an average person, just a random person in your region that's banding purple martins, that's interested in banding more purple martins. And then for the migration tracking side of things, your best bet might be actually just email us, and we've got kind of a list of people across the country who, in Texas, for instance, which sounds like you guys are down there, that are interested. And then if a research program comes along that is looking for a purple martin colony to band at in that area, and it matches the criteria of yours, then we can kind of connect the dots and put you together. So I think that's probably the best way. We're gonna get a lot of emails now, probably, but that's okay. It's great to have people that are interested in participating in that research, and we can't do it without volunteers such as yourself. And then their last question here, they have a saguaro cactus planted in their yard. Could martins that normally use man-made housing be trained to use natural sites for nesting? It's a great question, and there's kind of multiple levels to that. So there's a subspecies of martins that lives down in Arizona and bits of California and down into Mexico and in the Sonoran Desert that naturally nests in saguaro cavities that are typically made by Gila woodpeckers, or another woodpecker that I can't remember the name of right now. So there is a precedent for that. But as far as having a martin of the eastern subspecies nest in a naturally occurring cavity, it's not something that typically happens. That's not to say it's impossible. And then overall, for an entire colony of purple martins to be nesting naturally is so rare that the last one in known existence is no longer in existence. That was one in Florida that we became aware of and were monitoring, and you actually, one of your trips to Florida for vacation, went down looking to see if it's still active, and it's not. It's been those trees, the dead trees there with woodpecker holes that they were nesting in colonially, had fallen down, some of them fallen down just with hurricanes and natural rotting, and then starlings had moved in and taken over what was left. But there are occasionally, every couple of years, we have a picture of somebody who's got their martin house set up, and then there happened to be a tree not too far away that had a woodpecker hole in it or something that the martins nested in, or some other kind of odd one-off occurrences. So it's not out of the realm of possibility if you have a saguaro cactus with an appropriate cavity is really kind of the next question, right? It would need to have a woodpecker hole of the right size and shape and kind of angles that a martin would like. And made by a woodpecker, not really kind of drilled out by yourself, because the woodpecker, the activity of the woodpecker, first they're nesting in there. They're tunneling in there to have their own nest. And then after a year or two, then a martin would potentially move in there. At least that's the way it is in the Sonoran Desert. And the just kind of the natural excavation of that cactus. You think of a cactus as just kind of mush inside, but really it actually forms a kind of a callus on the inside of the tunnel that they've created. It's actually kind of woody. When those cactuses fall over and rot away, what's left are these little kind of wooden tubes. They're called cactus boots because they kind of are shaped like a boot. And they're like littered all over the desert floor, and that's these woodpecker holes that are left over that then, if they're big enough, the martins are nesting in. So not out of the realm of possibility that you could have a martin nest in the saguaro that you have in your, I say saguaro, you're supposed to say saguaro, and I cannot. Mentally, I cannot do that. So I apologize to anybody who knows better than me, which, well, now everybody does, but it's just like that G just jumps off the page. Saguaro. Anyway, that's the story on that. For
second confession.
Yeah, another confession. I cannot successfully say saguaro. I'm just stuck. Anyway, the next question is from Joe in New Baltimore. Here's another confession. I didn't know there was a New Baltimore. Did you know there's a New Baltimore? No. Did you know there's a New Baltimore?
No.
Joe, is there really a New Baltimore? And where is it? Is it next to the old Baltimore? This is kind of the dad joke section of the Q&A.
Excuse us.
Knock, knock.
Intermission.
Who's there?
The interrupted cow.
I think this seems like a good time to also say that one commenter, a Calla Segrist, said this guy is making some good points.
Oh no, Calla Segrist, thank you out there. That is definitely not a relative of mine. Definitely not my daughter. Thanks, honey. I hope you're having a good day. Thanks for tuning in. All right, this is from Joe in New Baltimore. He is designing his own birdhouse, and he wants to know what we recommend for what height the floors inside should be below the entrance. So he's looking at instructions that talk about the holes being even with the porch on the outside, no more than like a 1/4 inch above the porch. So here's the hole, here's the porch, flush or a 1/4 inch. Now, something in between there, but nothing more. And the reason that recommendation is in place is because the starling resistant entrances are a tight squeeze for martins. So starlings are just a smidge bigger than a purple martin. And really the biggest difference in them is kind of when they're standing, how they stand. So purple martins are just kind of like squatted up all the time. They just kind of like, they're not great walkers. They don't have to walk. They fly, they perch. They really don't spend any time walking except shuffling in and out of their nest and then maybe picking up some nesting material off the ground. But starlings spend all their time walking through grass and eating off the ground. So they've got kind of long, spindly legs and they stand up a little more straight. So that is like the biggest difference on starlings having trouble getting in through the starling resistant entrance where martins can squiggle through, is that, you know, if when you put that entrance like right down at the porch, the martins are already there, their body's already there, so they can kind of, you know, squeeze through there, where the starlings are all up straight and they've got to kind of get down and they don't really have the leverage to get through there. Stop laughing. Anyway, so but there's never any kind of recommendation on what where the inside floor should be in relation to that. And I think they are talking about, they mentioned, that gourds have their porch, they have an inside porch, and then the nest is like down here, so they drop off of it. But there's that inside porch that they can then use that same leverage to get back out.
Right.
So he's building a house and he wants to know, where should the floor be of the house? Well, it should be the same distance below as the internal porch on the gourd or the external porch. So really, it's going to be just as hard for them to get out as it is for them to get in. So inside, flush to a 1/4 inch, but if you want to use nest trays, you have to take the thickness of that into account. So like with the T14 house, the external porches are flush to a 1/4 inch or so, but inside there's a little more of a gap between the floor and the hole, and that is to account for a nest tray in there, because the nest trays are usually like a 1/2 inch thick or something, at least with that piece that goes up to the entrance. So flush to a 1/4 inch on the inside, unless you're doing nest trays, and then just account for that as additional depth. All right. Kat says they have starling resistant entrances, but a starling was able to get in and set up a nest this year. What do they need to add to the gourd entrances to not let this happen next season? So you want to take it?
Sometimes there can be a starling that for whatever reason is a little bit smaller and they can squeeze in to an entrance. There are gourds that have entrances, the Conleys, a little bit of a bigger of an entrance that starlings can still make their way in, and those entrances are found on gourds that have like a front plate. So if you have a lot of issues with starlings getting into that particular entrance, you can put another entrance plate over top of that to kind of reduce that entrance size even more. I guess if it's a gourd, you also want to make sure that the porch is flush, like what Joe just talked about earlier, making that space between the porch and the bottom of the entrance as close as possible. So depending on how you put your porches on, if you're giving too much space, raise that up, and then the starlings, you can do your impression again if you want. They can't squish down. The starlings can't squish down short enough to then fit in. So you can either replace the entrance if you have a gourd that you're able to do that, or raise your porches.
Yeah, that's a great point. So yeah, their porches might be too low, and that's the other side of the coin that I didn't mention when I was acting earlier, is that if your porch is too low for that entrance, with the Martin's long legs, they're like at the perfect height to just go right in. But yeah, with cowling entrances on the Troyer gourds, or if you've got some other type of gourd, there's a little arched piece that you can add over the front of it. I think it's called a starling stopper. Yeah, we've got those on our website you can buy. And there are some other, depending on, it doesn't say what type of gourd you have, but there are some of the S&K gourds that have an entrance that's not as starling resistant as well. It's just, but usually you can make modifications by using a starling resistant plate, which you can also get from us in our shop, that has a starling resistant entrance on it. All right. Sheila in Virginia Beach asked, we want to switch from compartment houses to gourds next season. Will the change be accepted by the birds? All right, so sounds like they're completely getting out of purple martin houses and going in to gourds. That's kind of like a Seinfeld thing, importing, exporting.
Okay.
We like Seinfeld. Go ahead.
Okay. It shouldn't be an issue. A lot of times we recommend leaving the old house up to give them a year to adjust. You might close most of that house so some birds can nest in it, but others have to move into the new gourds you put up. I guess depending on the state of the old house. If the old house is like in a lot of damage and it doesn't seem like a good nesting place for them, you know, don't worry about it and just put your gourds up. I think the Martins will like a bigger, better house in that of the gourds if that's the case of why you're replacing it. But if it's in good shape and you're thinking of still keeping it up, give them a year to adjust.
Yeah, I think that's what I was going to recommend.
Yeah.
Is, you know, a bit of both. You can close almost all of the house and have it out of commission, but the fact that it's still there and recognizable to them when they come back is only going to help. The totally removing that, if you've already done that, that's fine. You know, the Martins will be coming back to your location, but it'll be less of a kind of a shock to them and more recognizable if that house is still there. And even if that means closing it up entirely and having the gourds right nearby. But yeah, I would want to have the gourds. They didn't say how far away the gourds are going to be from where the house is. Ideally, fairly close. You know, if you're talking a long distance away, then that's almost like you're starting a new colony site at that point. Brent from Raceland says, I always wonder about young fledglings and what happens after they fly out. Do they fly with the parent birds and learn to hunt and feed by observation? And then there's a couple of kind of extensions of that. So yeah, there's like a couple of weeks to our understanding of parental care after they fledged. And a lot of that's kind of like a crash course in how to fly and land and find your way around and how to catch your own food. So initially the parents will, you know, really when they first fledge, they come out. There are other birds that'll kind of come and like kind of encourage them to fly rather than land on the ground, because it's really hard for these birds to get up off the ground if they end on it. And then they end up like in a nearby tree or sitting somewhere for most of the day, or at least for a quick kind of like, holy smokes, what just happened? I didn't know I could do that kind of thing. And the parents will deliver food to them, and then as it you know, kind of progresses over the course of a couple of weeks, the parents will, you know, lead them around with food or drop food, and just kind of guide them through the training of catching their own. And then after like 2 weeks, see you later, kids. Good luck. The parents head off. They may never see them again. They don't lead them down to Brazil. They don't even lead them to the pre-migratory roost that they're going to before they head down to Brazil. So it's like a couple of weeks, and that is that. So it's a little observation, a little bit of like dropping the food and just kind of getting them coordinated enough to catch the food. So that question then leads to their next question. What happens if a young nestling has to be brought to a rehabber and later set free? Does it make it on its own? Does instinct kick in and they learn to feed on their own? That's a great question. We just had some dealings with a rehabber in the area where these very questions were coming up. Like, what this bird was taken from its nest and it didn't have that training period from the adult. It seems it kind of learned to fly instinctually in their aviary as they were rehabbing it, but will it be able to catch its own food? I don't know. I don't know that anybody has a definitive answer for that. I mean, there has not been, you know, what it really needs to have happen is a study where, you know, it's happening widespread, that each bird that's rehabbed is banded and tracked. It wouldn't be with a backpack because the natural survival of fledglings is really low. Only about a quarter of all the birds that fledged from your colony will survive until the next breeding season. So 3/4 of those are going to die along the way. They're going to either, you know, one way or another, they're not making it back, which is tough. That's really high mortality. And then if you're putting on something with significant weight, like in a backpack, you're just lowering that percentage even more. So it wouldn't be a study through backpack tracking to monitor their survival, it would have to be through banding and just color bands on the legs. And that's a significant investment of energy and effort to do a study like that. So, and that hasn't been taken on, but that was something that we were discussing with this rehabber. It's just, it would take a lot of rehabbed birds that were banded that then are tracked over the years to determine that answer. And it's something that's, it just, the numbers aren't there. There's like, there are not that many rehabbers really, and each rehabber, sometimes they don't have any purple martins, sometimes they get one or have a couple that just make it to being fit enough to potentially be released. And I was asking the same question of this rehabber that was looking to come up to our purple martin roost here in Erie to release the birds. What does it seem like they're feeding on their own or not? And she didn't necessarily have an answer to that, which I don't know. I didn't really expect her to have that answer, I suppose. But her thought was it was worth it to give them a chance to survive. An argument could be made the other way. And I don't know that there's a right or a wrong answer when it comes to that. It's kind of a moral quandary, I suppose. But yeah, overall, without getting too deep, I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows for sure about an aerial insectivore that's been rehabbed and released without that kind of parental training after fledge. And then their last question from Brent, they just read about a Lights Out initiative by Louisiana Wildlife Federation. What exactly does lighting do to cause problems for our migratory birds? So you'll see that probably a lot more. There's been kind of a big push for lights out or bird safe lights out, bird safe cities. And that involves during times of kind of heavy bird migration, turning off outdoor lights. And at night, birds use the stars typically for navigation. And when there's a lot of light below them, it confuses them. So they evolved for millennia without artificial light at the ground. And they're just not tuned to ignore that. So they can end up off course, they can end up kind of stuck or drawn in even to those lights, and then you're running into situations where they're colliding with buildings. Famously, the World Trade Center, 9/11 every year when they do the big beams of light that shine upward, thousands and thousands and thousands of birds get stuck actually in that beam of light and are just circling in that light. And they're actually monitoring with weather radar, and as well as having people on the ground kind of monitoring with scopes to, when that reaches a certain kind of threshold of there's a lot of birds up there, they actually shut off those lights for a little bit, let the birds continue on their way before they turn it back on. So it's kind of a tension there between the two things. But yeah, so the lights can really throw them off. Purple martins are not nighttime migrators though. They migrate during the day. So a lot of songbirds migrate at night. And that's because they need to be able to be on the ground feeding during the day, or whatever method they use to feed usually requires them being at ground level and having good visibility so they can see where the seeds are or the bugs that they eat off the ground or whatever. So that leaves only nighttime for migrating. So migrate at night, during the day, rest up, eat some food. But purple martins, being aerial insectivores, they can fly and eat at the same time. And that corresponds with the day. So they've really kind of got it made when it comes to migrating. Sure, they're migrating a long way and they're spending time over the Gulf of Mexico, but they're atypical in their migration scheme. So the light at night does not affect them in the same way that it does other songbirds. However, there is a study that's been done, and it's kind of a budding kind of offshoot in science about the effect of artificial light at night on the circadian rhythms of the purple martin. So the natural timing of their activity and when they migrate even. So that just lights at night where your colony is. So if you've got spotlights on your martin housing, which some people actually do, thinking that it's going to help with owls, or just a really bright area at night that the martins are in, that actually throws their internal timing off a little bit, and they can migrate at a different time than they typically would have. And depending on the situation, maybe that's pushing them into being out of sync with when the ideal time is to migrate. So something to think about there, that light at night, even though it's not affecting your martin's migration as much, it might be affecting the timing of their life cycle events there. So they're not out of the woods when it comes to artificial light at night, I guess is what I'm saying. All right, our final question here before we can get some from chat is from Scott in southwestern Missouri. He's a new landlord, and the last year he only had one pair in his housing. At the end of the season this year, he noted 23 nests. So he went from
last 2 years. He only had one pair, and then this year he ended up having.
Yeah, okay. So he went from only 1 year, one pair, and then 23 pair. But he did not want to disturb the birds, so he never did a nest check during the season. They don't know how many little ones there were. And they say with such growth year over year, should they put up more for nest season? Do you want to take the nest check part of that?
It doesn't disturb the birds if you do nest checks. We do nest checks twice a week at our colonies. Just lowering it down and just looking quickly to count how many eggs there are, how many nestlings there are throughout the whole season. It doesn't deter the birds. They don't have a strong sense of smell, so that kind of saying that if you touch a bird, they'll abandon the nest. That's not true, and the purple martins will not abandon the nest if you do a nest check. So we actually do recommend that you check in at least weekly, so you can make sure that everything is going well. You don't need to intervene for parasites, or maybe there's a predator issue you're unaware of if you suddenly have eggs or nestlings missing. So we do recommend doing those nest checks. And then putting up more nests for next season, that's completely up to you. You can have whatever size colony that you want to take care of. If you are at complete capacity, the birds that show up after, they will just move on and find a new place, different place to nest. So if you want to add more, go ahead, but you can definitely just have the size colony that you want.
Yeah, I think really to be using best practices, you should start up with nest checks. Let that fear subside a little bit, and really the best thing you can do is make it a regular thing. So throughout the season, doing those weekly nest checks, because if you do wait until the end of the season, when the nestlings are kind of the fledging age, you do run a little bit more of a risk of them prematurely fledging or being disturbed by it. But if it's a regular occurrence, the birds are used to that. The adults aren't alarm calling as much when you're doing it. Everybody's a little less on edge. And then as far as adding housing, it looks like they had a total of 34 cavities. Last year they had 23 nests, but they're not exactly sure how many were active nests because they weren't during the nest checks.
It could have been a sparrow or something.
Yeah, it could have been another species as well. So I would say maybe hold off until this is a repeatable thing. If you have 23 or more nests next year and you know they're purple martins and you know they're healthy and you know that they fledged their young, then maybe you can consider expanding things out, would be my advice on that. So anyway, that's all of our pre-submitted questions. Lydia, do we have some questions from the gallery?
Yeah, we have a question from Mary. Going back to the question about if a fledgling it goes to a rehabber and then is released, what happens afterwards. She asks, why not keep a fledgling a full year after they've gone to a rehabber and not release it in the winter before migration, wait until spring, and then put it at the colony site where it fledged?
Okay, so Mary, I don't know if you guys could hear that through our mics, but she was asking about an extension from the question about rehabbers. Why not hang on to the nestling the entire year and then release it at the colony when they return the next year? And that really is something that's not advisable, and really you probably wouldn't even be able to legally do that. You absolutely are not legally able to do that at home, but even a rehabber, they need to have a good reason to keep an otherwise healthy bird for an entire year. Not to say that there haven't been cases where that is what's happened, but those birds are missing out on the imprinting of migration routes that naturally happens during that first year of life. Their brain is a lot of like brain plasticity, how young kids are able to learn a lot better than adults, especially when it comes to like certain things like language. Birds are the same way, but with migratory routes and the lay of the land. And martins have a huge, very strong sight fidelity to be able to migrate on instinct all the way down to Brazil and then find the way back that first year. It's incredible. And a lot of that is what happens naturally in their brain during that first year of life, and they would be missing out on that. So just, one of many reasons on why that's not an advisable thing to do, I suppose. Mm-hmm. All right, more questions?
That was the only other follow-up question. Larry Melcher is doing yard work. Wanted to say hello, but he's multitasking.
Hi, Larry.
Hi, Larry.
And Gamer Goose says, you're full of funny jokes.
Gamer Goose, thank you so much. That may or may not be my son. So both kids have chimed in on the chat here. I don't know, is my wife in chat as well? All right. Well, we'll subtract 2 from the natural viewership of this stream, but thank you. In real life, he doesn't think I'm funny at all. So in this virtual relationship that we seem to have, I'm funny. So that's good. Thank you, Nathan. Get back to work. All right. Well.
I have one more question. Sorry, just
here's
came up.
another one.
Will Hurricane Helene affect the migration?
Will Hurricane Helene affect the migration? So there are still birds headed that haven't left the shores of the U.S. yet. So Hurricane Helene will potentially impact them in one way or another. Martins are usually pretty good at getting out of the way of hurricanes. That's not to say that they all do. In fact, on our social media earlier this year, you probably saw a GPS track from a bird that we tagged in Connecticut that actually got caught in a hurricane last year. So a phenomenon that can happen with songbirds, or birds in general, I guess, and hurricanes is, the hurricane comes on and they're hunkered down. They're hanging onto a tree branch for dear life, trying to stay dry, and that hurricane gets worse and worse and worse, and then all of a sudden it's nice. So they take off, and they don't know that that's the eye of the hurricane. And then, they kind of are stuck in that eye that's surrounded by the worst wind that's possible. And sometimes they can end up having to go with that eye of the hurricane, especially if it goes out over the ocean again, because there's nowhere to land and tough it out for the rest of the hurricane. And last year, this bird from Connecticut actually did get stuck in the eye of a hurricane, and it spent 6 days over the Atlantic Ocean. We'll have a paper coming up on that, a research paper, but also something in the Purple Martin update. For those of you who are members of the PMCA, please join. If you're not, but if you are, that's something to look forward to in our magazine, which is a benefit for PMCA members. You get a quarterly magazine with all kinds of cool stuff about Purple Martins. latest research, just overall an enjoyable read. And you also get a discount in our shop on Purple Martin housing and other materials and gifts, and it supports us. But anyway, I digress. So Hurricane Helene is on its way into Florida, and it probably will be impacting some birds. Those Florida birds have already migrated, those are gone. So it would just be the birds coming from farther north that are passing through Florida. And again, usually they kind of steer clear. They'll either kind of reverse course, the martins themselves, or just endure it. Really, the biggest risk of a hurricane that's outside of the breeding season is to that purple martin housing that is still installed in Florida. So if you're in the path of the hurricane and you have a moment to devote to your purple martins, I know you're getting your house ready and all your property and yourselves and getting out of harm's way. But even just lowering the housing to make it less susceptible to the wind or taking it in altogether is something that we recommend if a big storm is on the way. But yeah, there probably will be some birds that get kind of blown around a little bit, but usually, and even in the case of this bird that got blown out to sea from Connecticut, it survived. It made it down to Brazil and it made it all the way back, and that's how we have the GPS track from it. So it was a survivor, and they can do some pretty amazing things, feats of survivals. Another question.
Mary asked, what are the conditions in Brazil with the drought?
Oh boy, that's a great question. What are the conditions in Brazil with the drought? Yeah, there's a historic drought going on in Brazil. The Amazon River and its tributaries last year, they were the lowest that they had ever been recorded. This year, they're actually 15 feet lower than that. It usually reaches its lowest point. So right now it's during the dry season. The dry season tends to end at about a month from now. So, if that kind of difference between last year and this year holds, it'll be, another record of the lowest water ever by far. It is affecting the martins down there. It's not to say there's no rain that happens. There's still periodic little bit of rains. It's still a rainforest, but it's not like this huge amounts of rain. And a lot of the water that fills the Amazon is from farther upstream in the Andes and in Colombia and farther upstream in the Amazon rainforest, not necessarily where the martins are when they're overwintering. They tend to be a little bit more in the middle of the Amazon. But it's almost certainly affecting things. There are a lot of fires that are widespread there that have been caused by human activities. So there's a lot of smoke in the air. Birds are particularly vulnerable to air pollutants. So that probably is affecting them some. Although last year that was the same case, and we still had plenty of martins return home from that. So I don't want you to think that the fires are going to kill all of our martins. They'll still be fine. The nice thing about martins down there is that they're not tied to any one place. Here, when they're nesting, they're stuck. They're taking care of that nest and are limited to a certain radius around it where they can go out and get food during the day, and they've got to be back by bedtime. Down there, if the conditions in a particular location really are not great, it's really droughty, there's nothing to eat, they can get up and move somewhere else. That's not ideal because potentially, that location where they traditionally would have been is one that they've kind of evolved and adapted to. It's like the ideal spot for them at that time. So anything that pushes them out of that ideal spot is going to be more energetically taxing for them. Maybe they have to fly farther for food. Maybe there are more predators. So it's not ideal. So it's not to say that they are, perfectly adaptable to, this new awful situation in Brazil. The other factor that might be affecting them is just the changes in insect availability that go along with the drought. So in the Amazon, the water cycle dictates everything. So it dictates, rainfall and this cyclical nature of rain there determines when plants grow, when flowers bloom, when insects emerge. And any changes to that kind of natural rhythm of things is going to affect when insects are available. So the martins are almost certainly being affected by the drought down there. I don't think that we're going to have, next year be a year where no martins come back. But it's certainly not an ideal situation. They're predicting that this El Nino that they're blaming this drought on down there is going to be ending soon. And then maybe next year we can get back to a more normal rain regime down there. And along with normal rainfall, that reduces the size and the intensity of those natural fires that are unfortunately being set down there. So it's certainly something that we're in contact with our research partners and governmental partners in Brazil about, but it's just a huge widespread issue that the martins are feeling the effects of it, almost certainly. The good thing is that they can fly to areas of Brazil where those effects are less pronounced, let's say. So, any more questions?
Nope, that's it.
All right. I forgot what our sign-off was. Do you remember what it was? What was it? We'll see you next time.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. All right. So, that's it for us.
Keep flying high.
And we'll see you next time.
Sorry to do this with you.